Hello, everybody, and welcome to the virtual Friends for Life Indianapolis. I am Marissa Town, and I'm going to introduce Jessica Kichler. Jessica Kichler is a pediatric psychologist who specializes in working with chronically medically ill children and their families. She is also a certified diabetes educator. She provides individual, family, and group therapy for all ages of children and their families. She also participates in research, education, and training in areas of adjustment and coping, adherence, and psychosocial outcomes of chronic illness in children and families. Dr. Kichler is professor of pediatrics at the University of Cincinnati Medical School in the Division of Behavioral Medicine and Clinical Psychology at the Cincinnati Children's Hospital Medical Center in Cincinnati, Ohio.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I'm going to share my screen now and go ahead and do my talk today on dealing with diabetes burnout. So let me open that up real quick. Okay, so in dealing with diabetes burnout, we're going to spend the next half hour talking a little bit about what diabetes burnout is and what are some strategies for you to work with, either for yourself or if you are a parent of a child with type 1 diabetes, of how you can work with your children. So as we know, with A1C in the middle, our ultimate glycemic control measure, which has a lot of its pros and cons, but it ends up being a lot of the gold standard of how people are measuring A1C. Now, obviously, we know there's some changes to that coming in terms of measuring CGM and time in range and other things, but for now, a lot of times we measure A1C as a 3-month average. But we know with that number, there's a whole host of factors that impact this A1C. So there's some factors that are in our control and some factors that aren't in our control. And some things that wouldn't be in our control would be going through puberty or having cycles different times of the month if you're a female, having stress and emotions in your life, illnesses. But a lot of the other things can be somewhat in our control in terms of site rotation, how much we're exercising, insulin dosing and timing, blood sugar checking, food and eating habits. So as you can see from this, there's just so many factors, and I know that there's even more factors than this. I've seen in the diatribe there's 42 factors affecting one blood sugar number. So there's a lot of factors, and this can lead to burnout because some of the things are in your control and some of the things aren't in your control. Yet when you go to your quarterly diabetes visits, a lot of times you're given this A1C almost as if it's a grade or a judgment on how you've been doing, and not everything is in your control when it comes to this number. So that can lead to a lot of diabetes burnout. And some of you may be very well familiar with Bill Polanski, who wrote the book Diabetes Burnout and What to Do When You Can't Take It Anymore. If you haven't seen that, it is it's an excellent book, and he goes through a lot of different coping strategies and things like that. So I'm going to summarize some pieces of it, but feel free to look into that book as well for yourself. And really, we're looking at diabetes burnout in 2 stages. You can have acute diabetes burnout, and that's where I'm going to hide myself view so you guys can't see that piece of it. There we go. Oh no, that's not working. Okay, I'm just going to tuck myself over here. Okay, so there's 2 different stages of burnout. There can be the acute stage where you are newly diagnosed and you are really coping with all of the changes in your lifestyle and all of the things that are happening at a very rapid pace when you're first diagnosed. And then there's also burnout over long-term coping. And after about a year or 2 of having diabetes, we know that you move into long-term coping, long-term adjustment, and there can be another burnout phase where the sort of short-term piece of, okay, I can get this, I can learn this, shifts into this long-term of, wow, I have to maintain this for a long time. I have to get up and do this over and over and over every day without much seemingly breaks. And so there's 2 different big pieces of long-term coping issues. And there's so many reasons why diabetes burnout occurs. And really, diabetes burnout is defined as feeling overwhelmed, sad, angry, irritated, almost in many ways feelings of depression, but it's all geared towards diabetes and diabetes management and having diabetes and accepting your diabetes. And so unlike depression, which is much more global and it might impact your functioning in school and your relationships and everything else, and at your job, this really is focused in on diabetes coping and diabetes adjustment. And there's so many reasons why it occurs. And so one of my main goals today is to just normalize that it happens, and it happens to a vast majority of people at various times throughout their trajectory with diabetes. And there's a lot of reasons why it occurs. You can be maybe in denial or having struggled with acceptance of your diabetes status. You can be overwhelmed. You can feel all alone. You can have learned helplessness or fear. Um, so I want to talk a little bit about how we want to have an impact of fear and stress and this sense of diabetes burnout, and really how we conceptualize these emotions, maybe these overwhelmed feelings, these distress feelings, these negative feelings about diabetes. And truly, what we want to have happen is we don't want there to be no fear or no stress or no emotions at all about diabetes. So if you look at this Yerkes-Dodds diagram, stress is along the bottom here, performance is on the side. And if you have too low of stress about diabetes, then your performance is low, because if you're not at all concerned about it, or you're not at all taking it seriously, or you're not at all watching it and being conscientious about it, then your stress is super low about it, right? Diabetes doesn't matter. And then your performance goes down in terms of how you're doing and taking care of it. And on the flip side, if you're too stressed about it, if every little moment is micromanaged and is only about diabetes and not balancing out sort of quality of life with diabetes, then you can go over the top and get into burnout. And so our ideal is to have sort of this peak performance right at that moderate level of, we don't want you to have no stress about diabetes or completely dismissive of it, but we don't want to go over the top and move into burnout. So your job, either as a parent of a child with diabetes or as a person with diabetes yourself, is to sort of gauge where you are on this. Are you sort of in the middle? Are you starting to sneak over the top? Are you really going over the top and moving towards burnout? And really watching for that at different times and different stages of your life. It may be with a transition to college. It may be with a transition to a new job. It may be transition to motherhood. Anything like that can really help, can really tip that over the top. And so you really have to be aware of it. So this is a silly little optical illusion that I like to have people look at as we're thinking about how do we take this burnout. Okay, so I'm aware that I have it. I see the reasons why I have it. Now, what are some things I can do about it? So I always start with this silly little optical illusion. And so most of you have probably seen this, but the question is, which of the middle circles is bigger? And obviously, and the middle circles are exactly the same. And so that's the optical illusion. But as you can tell, the one on the right looks bigger compared to this one, even though they are the exact same cut and copy and pasted dots here, because things around it are bigger in relation to those other circles that are bigger, this feels smaller. And so what we want to do when we're thinking about diabetes burnout is think about this middle circle being diabetes. We can't take away the fact that you need to count the carbohydrates, you need to, change the pump set. We need to take some time and energy in thinking about diabetes on a daily basis. And I can't wave my magic wand and make that all go away, even with the best of technology and the newest cutting edge things. There's still a certain part of our lives that have to be dealt with diabetes. But if your friendships, if your activities, if your school and your family are more enriched, are bigger, are more positive, and you're investing some time and energy in making those a good part of your life, then diabetes can feel more manageable in comparison, versus if you are struggling with your friendships, if you're struggling to engage in activities with diabetes, if you're struggling in school, if you're struggling with family relationships, diabetes actually feels even more overwhelming on top of all of that. So I always want us to think about in what ways, one of the ways to make diabetes burnout feel more manageable is actually not as much investing in diabetes as it is in investing in all of the other aspects of your life that make you feel like you have a whole and complete life in addition to diabetes, so that you can feel that diabetes isn't as dominant in your life, and that you have other places where you find joy and happiness. And so a lot of the times what will happen, especially when it comes to the family relationships or even some friendships, is that some of our caregivers, whether it's a parent of a child with diabetes, or it's a roommate in college, or it's your partner, it's your husband, it's your wife, it's your coworker at work. Sometimes there are some people who want to be helpers and are trying to help you, or you're trying to help your child with diabetes. You can accidentally become the diabetes police in an effort to help the person with diabetes. And so you have to watch out in the world for who your diabetes police might be, because we want people to help you. We want people, or if you're a parent of a child with diabetes, we want you to be a helper. But we really, really need to be careful of having our helpers tip into being policing the people with diabetes, and working towards instead interdependence. So when there is the diabetes police happening, there's this concept called miscarried helping, and I'm going to show you this in a second. And we really don't want people to engage in miscarried helping when you're helping the person with diabetes. But we really want to have the people on your team, the people who are helping you with diabetes, really teach this idea of interdependence, where your teammates all have jobs and things they help you with, but it's as more of an equal team member and not as a police or an authority figure making you do something. And so if you're a parent of a child with diabetes listening to this, think about how you're maybe falling into the diabetes police, or if you're a young adult or an adult with diabetes listening to this, think about who you've invited to be on your team and what kind of a role they're playing, or if there's someone who's on your team who is maybe falling into the diabetes police, and let's think about ways that they can help you manage your diabetes, because the more you feel policed by it, the more likely you're going to feel burned out by diabetes. And so whether you're a parent or a person with diabetes, thinking about who your helpers are and how they're helping you. So this concept of miscarried helping came out from Michael Harris, who is a diabetes psychologist out in Oregon, and he really coined this back in 2006, I guess. And this idea of miscarried helping is really, really powerful, and it's what we as helpers, and I have to catch myself in this too, because I definitely can catch myself in miscarried helping. So it's where the helper, that's the parents, the endocrinologist, the psychologist, the neighbor down the street, the helper really wants to be helpful and supportive, right? So that's great and wonderful. But then the helper, in an effort to be helpful, increases efforts, adds demands, doubts, and criticisms as a way to try to help. And they say, well, I'm going to put this effort. Did you do this? Did you do that? Why didn't this happen? Why didn't this work out? And so they're trying to help. So their intent is good, but the way in which they're helping adds doubts and criticisms, which then makes the patient or the person with diabetes feel shamed and blamed, discouraged and unmotivated, angry towards the helper, and also really angry at themselves, because 99.9% of the people with type 1 diabetes want to take care of their diabetes. It's not that they don't want to, it's just that it can be very hard and very overwhelming. And then when they feel like the diabetes police is coming at them, they're going to lash out at them. So the patient increases non-adaptive choices to preserve autonomy. If ever there was a psychobabble phrase, it's that. But basically what that means is then the patient gets or the person with diabetes gets so angry that they're feeling shamed and blamed about their diabetes, that they will then say, fine, I'm not doing it. fine, I'm going to make a bad choice or a not good choice or a not healthy choice because I'm so overwhelmed and so shamed and blamed. In order to keep my independence and from feeling so bad about myself, I'm just going to reject the whole thing. So, which then makes the helper want to be even more helpful, more supportive. And then the helper adds even more demands and more doubts and more criticisms. There's more shame and blame. There's less likely engagement in positive diabetes activities. And you can see we're off to the races. Now, what I really like about this cycle is that it doesn't blame anyone. This is just a cycle that humans can get into, and it's not the caregiver's fault. It's not the helper's fault. It's also not the person with diabetes fault. This is just how it can roll. And so everybody has a job in unhooking out of this cycle. So the helper needs to really think about and find ways to be helpful in a way that is not inducing shame and blame and is being more neutral and supportive. And then the patient or the person with diabetes also, if they are feeling shamed and blamed and frustrated, they need to make sure they're not taking out that anger on their diabetes and saying, forget it, I'm not checking, I refuse to do this, I'm not going to do this, and as a way to sort of handle those big feelings, but instead be like, okay, I'm mad about this, but I'm still going to take care of this and take care of my diabetes for my own self. So what I'm often doing with families that I work with is on this side, I'm having the, often I'm a pediatric psychologist, so I'm often working in families as I'm having the parents over here think about ways that they can be helpful and supportive in a way that's more neutral to positive. And then for the person with diabetes to come up with ways that even when they are feeling shamed and blamed, how can they still push through with their own diabetes goals? And then also asking the person with diabetes, what would be helpful over here? What can your helper do for you that would be helpful? And not that they come totally out, because that's what also can happen is that when the person with diabetes starts to reject the help, then the helper's like, fine, I'm out. I'm not doing anything for you then. And that's not what we want either. We want to move towards this concept of interdependence. And interdependence is when the helper and the person with diabetes sort of work in tandem. And so if it's a parent-child relationship, maybe the helper is doing some of the higher order activities like ordering supplies and looking at pattern management and those kinds of things. And then the person with diabetes is maybe doing their own injections or whatever you've worked out, but they're working in tandem with each other rather than in opposition and sort of management. So there's a lot of recommendations that come with miscarried helping. And so whether you're a parent of a child with diabetes or you're an adult with diabetes listening to this, thinking about who your helpers are or think about how you can be a good helper, because miscarried helping happens no matter what age you are. And it's the failure of well-intentioned attempts to help because they're excessive, untimely, or inappropriate, and they're shame-inducing. And so a family member's investment in being helpful may paradoxically lead to interactions that are constraining and detrimental. And so everyone's goal is to take as best of care of your diabetes as you can. That's everyone's goal. And now we have to think about how do we help your parents, or how do we help your caregivers or your team members really learn first what would be helpful by asking the adolescent, asking the young adult. I run into this a lot. I have to ask, what can I do to be helpful? Because sometimes as a helper, I want to jump in and say, well, I've heard this and I want to do this and I want to do that. But I have to really let the person with diabetes guide what would be helpful. And then when you guys work together, in my world, it's adolescents and parents. So a lot of it is having the teen express what they need and the parents provide that level of support, not for the parents to step out and say, hey, it's independent, you're independent, you're independent, or dependent. It's this term called interdependence, where everybody's got a job and everybody's got a role, and you guys are working together, and it'll shift over time as you get moved from childhood to adolescence to young adulthood to adulthood. That's actually one of my next talks, is how to handle this in all of the different developmental stages. But even having that conversation of, this is what I need from you, this is what I need from you, this is how we can work it out, is really, really helpful at making sure interdependence is happening and not miscarried helping. We know that adherence is a big struggle in the teenage years until early young adulthood, and then it gets a little bit better in young adulthood. So just this slide is just a strong push towards interdependence, especially in the teenage years, because this is a lot of time developmentally that teenagers want independence. They're driving, they're being more independent with their friendships and schoolwork, yet diabetes keeps parents not able to fully give them independence with diabetes. So interdependence is a way to still honor the teenagers' independence and autonomy and their some of their own decisions, but also keeping the parents involved, because we know that when parents are involved, teenagers do better, but it's about how they're involved. Are they involved in like a diabetes police sort of overwhelming way, which may accidentally make it worse, or are they involved in this interdependent way in which they're helping their teens make good choices and guiding them and supporting them on their diabetes journey? So that's a topic all about how, from a diabetes burnout point of view, if family is one of those bubbles that is smaller and needs to be improved upon, that you guys can think about ways that you can have those conversations with your families and your friends about how they can be helpers to you. Another one of the main areas that cause diabetes burnout is this concept of learned helplessness. And learned helplessness is defined as when good actions don't lead to good results. So you've done everything, you changed your sites, you counted, you corrected, you did everything, and the number's still not where you want it to be. And then that feels frustrating. It feels futile. Like, well, why did I do all that work and I still got this number that feels too high for what I wanted? And so a lot of diabetes is that learned helplessness, because there are so many factors. There's 42 factors per blood sugar. And so who knows what other factor, which wasn't totally in your control, was coming into play here. And so that can really lead to this sense of, no matter what I do, nothing good is going to happen, or nothing's ever going to improve, or I do all this effort and I moved, maybe my A1C a half a percentage point, and that didn't feel like enough to you. And so you work hard at your job with diabetes and you don't always feel it, you see the benefits. And so oftentimes people will say that diabetes feels like a condition of failure, where everything's about, well, what went wrong, what didn't happen, what didn't work, what pattern didn't happen. And so you really have to be aware of that concept of learned helplessness, and when it starts to sneak into your brain a little bit of that, because really our brains will focus in all the times it didn't work, and we sometimes forget all the times, and we sort of put blinders on. Well, it didn't work here, it didn't work here, it didn't work here. Okay, it didn't work at that one soccer practice, but it also did work 9 other times at soccer practice, but we focus in on the one time it didn't work. And so we're really going to have to teach some strategies around, first of all, recognizing that you're getting caught in learned helplessness, and then what to do about it. And so as you're thinking about learned helplessness, I want you to think a little bit about what type of coping style you have. Again, there are 3 different types that are typically named out there. None of them are sort of right or wrong. They're just different. And so as you're thinking for yourself and for the people in your family, are you someone that copes through emotion focus, where you need to express your emotions, talk about your emotions, and do things to get your emotions released? Are you someone that moves into problem solving? So there's a problem, I need to fix it, and you cope by saying, well, this is an issue, and I'm going to do this, this, and this next time, and I'm going to sort of use myself as a human experiment and be a problem solving person. Or avoidance. And that's where, if something bad happens, you say, okay, well, that happened, and now I recognize it happens once in a while, and I'm going to avoid overly focusing on it, because I know that it's not something that happens all the time. So none of them are all good or all bad, but you have to think about, we actually kind of want a balance of all 3, and thinking about which ones, even if you lean towards being emotion focused, how can you sort of lean in on some of your problem solving or some of your avoidance when needed, and how you can use that, or pay attention to different family members and what's their go-to coping style, because you may notice that different people have different coping styles as their default. And so you may need to say, Mom, I need you to come out of problem solving, and I need just to be emotion. I just need to talk to you about my frustrations right now. And I don't need you to fix it. I just need you to talk about it. And so if you are thinking about these different coping styles, think about labeling them and using them in your family. And so that we can all work on handling discouraging events in a healthy way that uses maybe all three of these coping strategies, behaviorally and cognitively. So here's a list of a whole bunch of different stress management skills. Some of these cartoony things are a little bit juvenile, but really all of them are good for all of us of any age: reading a book, yell into a pillow, taking a walk. So these are all behavioral things that you can do to distract yourself from feelings of learned helplessness. And then there's also problem solving strategies. So if you want to go into the problem solving coping strategy, these are different steps to problem solving and really working through these steps. I know it feels a little painstaking to go through each of these 4 steps, but really, really, if you have a problem, if you're noticing learned helplessness and you're seeing this pattern over and over again at work, every day after lunch, this is happening, really stop and think and identify the problem. How does the problem make you feel? What choices could you make? And really think of it as like an experiment. Brainstorm, good or bad. Come up with all kinds of different options, and then decide which choice you will make. What materials do you need? Who's involved? How can you get that choice tried out? And then act. Follow through with your choice. Make sure the problem was solved. If it wasn't solved, you don't tear this thing up and say, fine, I forget it, I'm not going to solve it. You go back to your other option and say, okay, well, option A didn't work. Let's try option B. And that life is going to be a series of trying different things. Oh, that didn't work. Or maybe it'll work for a couple of weeks and then it won't work because something else is happening. And so you need to go back. And as simple as this seems, as I put it on the board here, like if you wanted to write it out, in my diabetes groups, we have parents and kids write out this problem solving strategies and really go through it in a written form for a couple of weeks, and then get really good at this and then switch over to verbal, because I really do think that the act of problem solving and slowing down that process rather than jumping to one answer, this is a really good thing between parents and kids. If a parent thinks they have the answer and they're like, well, if you just did blah, 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 then this would work. Well, really have the kids pull out the option, have the teenagers come up with some strategies, have them try it out, see if it works, see if it doesn't work, because it really gives them this idea of growth mindset that, instead of feeling like you're constantly failing, the failing is more of a learning opportunity. Failure is data, failure is information, not that you personally are failing at this, but that mistakes and things that aren't working well are an opportunity to learn and tweak and do things a little bit differently. So you really can instill a different way of thinking about diabetes and diabetes management if you take on this problem solving strategies. And then from an avoidance coping strategy, this is a nice slide that I like to think about, of whether you're leaning more towards being an optimist or pessimist. So if you have a bad experience, so a number was really low unexpectedly and you didn't know it, you can do some problem solving, you can do some distraction around it, but you can also say, hey, this is not like me. This was maybe one of those factors. This too will pass. This is a small part of my life. I'm going to focus in on saying that sometimes diabetes doesn't want to behave and we may never know why. We had that one random low that one time, and then move on. Versus a pessimist would have a bad experience and think that the one low or the one event would be so like me, I caused it, it's permanent, it's going to impact my whole life. And so we want you to think a little bit about putting bad experiences in perspective. So obviously we want to process information and see if we can make anything better, but at the same time we also need to move forward and move on and do the best we can with it. So, and then when you have a good experience, to really focus in on all of those successes you do have, those small successes, those things that it is working out. So this is another way from an avoidance coping point of view that we do want you to, look at bad experiences, but then put them in their place and move on from them. So just to sort of wrap up, diabetes burnout is something that impacts all of us. It impacts everyone at different stages. So really be aware when your stress and your distress is going over the top. Be aware of in your family and in your support team when miscarried helping is happening and how you can communicate and have some interdependence coming along with your team members, paying attention to your different coping styles, especially when learned helplessness kicks in, and rely on certain times to have emotion focused coping, and that's where you distract yourself and you go outside, or you do problem solving and you go into problem solving coping, or you do some cognitive coping around avoidance and you say, you know what, this happens, I'm going to roll with it and I'm going to move forward. And so really thinking about burnout in these ways of areas that you can take control over something that doesn't always feel in your control, is you can control how you choose to respond to it and react to it. So be kind to yourself. Surround yourself with supportive people who can help share your burden. In some cases, the best action is no action. We don't have to overreact to every time you have one low blood sugar and it doesn't become a pattern. Don't change up your basal rates and change everything up. Sometimes it just has to roll and we don't always know why. Avoid perfectionism. Learn the art of diabetes, meaning that sometimes you're going to do everything exactly the same and you're going to get a different result. And there's just an art to diabetes, and 2 and 2 does not always equal 4 in this business. And feeling stressed about diabetes is normal and can be managed with some of the strategies that we talked about here. So I'm going to end with some additional book resources. Many of them you might have seen already. These are great books that are out there. Parents' Guide to Children with Juvenile Diabetes, Type 1 Teens, A Guide to Managing Your Life. Cheating Destiny is a great one too. James Hirsch is both a person with diabetes and a father, and his son also has type 1 as well, and he's writing a book from sort of both perspectives. And then the Guide to Raising a Child with Diabetes. So I wanted to throw those books out there as great resources, and then provide the references as well to my talk today. All right, thank you.
Thank you so much, Jessica. That was awesome. So I have a few questions that some of the CWD team has come up with. And if you don't mind, I'll ask you a few of those questions.
Great.
Okay. So one of the questions was, how do you know if you're experiencing burnout? Are there any like telltale signs?
Yes, some of the telltale signs are really feeling unmotivated for diabetes and really feeling that you have to take so much extra energy that it's above and beyond your typical energy. I mean, no one loves to do things that you have to do every day with diabetes, but you really find yourself having to dig really deep to do anything and really finding that negative energy, negative thoughts, negative mood, and that irritability really kicking in. So it really does feel sort of like a mini depression almost, but it's really all geared towards your diabetes. And anytime diabetes is coming up, that's when your mood shifts or your motivation shifts, or your ability to sort of get up and just have the energy to do it is really, really at a higher level than it's normal for you.
Okay. And let's say I'm a parent of someone with diabetes. How do I start the conversation about creating the interdependent diabetes management?
So as a parent, what I would do is I would sit down with your child. I would just start with, we work as a team, and I would set the tone as I want to be a team member. And I really want to hear, and even with a little child of 5, 7, 8, you can do this. What can I do? I want to be the most helpful member of your team. What can I do to help you? And really asking them. And it's amazing what comes out of their mouths sometimes when we just take time to to stop and ask them and see what they have to say. And a lot of times they'll sort of touch your heart a little bit, because you'll really be surprised that they really have thought about it and they're really able to articulate what they want. So as simple as just asking. And I do it all the time too, because I think as parents or as helpers, we want to help so much that we jump in fast and we want to do this and we want to do it for you because we want to relieve this burden. But really the best way to relieve the burden is to go, hey, I'm here for you and I am your team member and I want to hear your opinion about what you think, and putting them in sort of that driver's seat and putting them a little bit more into that. You have some control, and in some ways you have some say in how this all plays out for you. And that really is an empowering kind of move for them.
Yeah, I think that could probably also be carried over for spouses or significant others for adults, honestly.
Exactly. Yeah, that's why I said miscarried helping does not matter your age at
No,
all. Yeah.
no, not at all. And, you can never want to be doing this on your own, even as an
Mm-mm.
adult. And then, I think you talked a lot about all the symptoms and some coping tips, but it's still really overwhelming often to look at all the things that we need to do to manage our diabetes. And how can we, as people with diabetes, keep perspective and prevent sliding into a burnout?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I think a lot of it is doing things like coming to Friends for Life and joining the positive social media groups and things that just help put it in perspective, right? And I know memes and things like that are kind of silly, but it really does put things back in perspective of like, seeing that and being like, okay, we're all in this together, and that this is not me alone. And you might not have a ton of people around you with type 1, but even if virtually or by coming to Friends for Life or by doing different JDRF or ADA kind of activities and walks and diabetes camp, when you feel like you're not in it alone, that is what helps put you in perspective. And you see someone else who's dealing with that low and that persnickety low that never comes up after that practice. You're like, oh, they get me, they've got it, and I can have my people in my tribe, and just sort of create your tribe, even if it's not always in person.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, it's been tremendous help for me my whole life, going to
Mm-hmm.
camps and Friends for Lives and JDRF
Mm-hmm.
events. Yeah, it's all the community.
The
Um,
community.
so I think for the last question, I wanted to ask, given the current global health crisis,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes diabetes management can take the back burner. Do you
Mm-hmm.
have any tips for staying on top of our diabetes needs during?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think at this point, we do have to remember to go back to the basics, right? This is a time when we're all super stressed, and someone described it as there's almost this like noise going on in our heads at all time, because we have this level of anxiety, this sort of national level of anxiety that we're all feeling, myself included. And I think there's moments that we really have to shut down the news media. We have to shut down and stick to what we know of the basic, a schedule, sticking to eating, sticking to sleeping, sticking to all of these things that if school's off indefinitely and we have all of these opportunities, that we really honor our bodies by remembering that to have a schedule and to just go back to the basics. And that is actually the best thing for our bodies, and all of us included, whether you have diabetes or not. We all need to stick to a schedule and do the schedule because our bodies need it, and our anxiety will go down because the routine of it will be familiar and will help us not spin and spin and spin.
Very, very good advice. I'm
Mm-hmm.
really trying to keep my feet on the ground as well.
Yes, exactly.
Well, thank you so much, Jessica. I think this will be the end of this session, but we have 2 more sessions for you. So check them out when you guys have some time. Thank you.